From the notorious Ted Bundy to the most wanted terrorist in American history, here are the 10 most infamous people ever added to the FBI's most wanted list. Number 10. Theodore Robert Bundy. This man had to be among the most famous serial killers in history. He was also among the most notorious men to ever grace the FBI's most wanted list. I'm of course talking about the man popularly known as Ted Bundy. It's hard to know even where to begin with Bundy's murders. According to his official biography, Ted Bundy murdered at least 36 women during the 1970s before eventually being executed in the electric chair after 9 years on death row in 1989. He was without a doubt the most horrendous human being in serial killer history. And even though there are 36 known victims, several experts believe it could be upwards of 100. It all started sometime in 1974 when women in Seattle and from around Oregon began to go missing. Right from the beginning, police were aware of a man with dark hair known only as Ted, who apparently lured his victims to his car by either pretending to be injured or asking for some help. He was eventually caught in the most ludicrous of ways when he was pulled over by the police and they searched his car to find a mask, a crowbar, rope, and handcuffs. He was initially arrested for having these tools on him. It wasn't until later that the real crimes began to pile up. But here's where his spot on the most wanted list comes in. Ted Bundy managed to escape from prison twice in a single year. He jumped out of a window at his courthouse, vanished into the hills, and was recaptured 8 days later. In the same year, he climbed out of a hole he had made in his cell ceiling and was gone for several months, during which time he went on a murderous rampage before eventually being pulled over yet again for not obeying traffic laws and then being recaptured. Number 9. William Bradford Bishop. William Bradford Bishop is the very definition of a monster. While he definitely didn't kill as many people as Bundy, he was certainly a ruthless criminal. In 1976, Bishop allegedly beat his wife, his mother, and his children to death before vanishing. That's a total of 5 murders, as he had 3 sons. It was a pretty horrendous crime, and somehow he managed to stay on the run ever since. Perhaps this is in part due to the fact that Bishop was a United States Foreign Service officer and had a pretty good idea of how to meld into the shadows. It's unclear why exactly he would have beaten his entire family to death, and it's likely that at this point we'll never find out. Even though his crimes were so heinous, Bishop wasn't added to the most wanted list until 2014. But even after this guy was placed on the list, the FBI still couldn't catch him. He's vanished into the wind, and nobody knows where he is. It's been over 40 years since his savage crimes, and he could literally be anywhere on Earth, even dead. As of right now, Bishop would be about 85 years old. Even if they do catch him, it doesn't even make a difference at this point. He committed a horrendous crime and still got away with it. The FBI dropped his name from their most wanted list in 2018. Number 8. Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden was certainly the most notorious terrorist in the world. But what a lot of people don't know is that he was on the wanted list of the FBI far before he masterminded the terrifying tragedy that unfolded on September 11th. He was actually put on the most wanted list in 1993 for his part in a bombing in Mogadishu that ended up killing 18 Americans. He was also responsible for the first attack on the World Trade Center that ended up killing 6 people. Throughout the years, Osama bin Laden attacked many United States military bases throughout the Middle East, as well as several different embassies throughout Africa. In total, Osama bin Laden was responsible for roughly 250 American deaths even before his attack in 2001. He was arguably the most murderous and ruthless fugitive to ever make the FBI's most wanted list, as he was an entirely different criminal from someone like Ted Bundy. In August 2010, Osama bin Laden was traced to a compound in Pakistan, where CIA agents watched the house he was staying in for months. According to History.com, on May 2, 2011, a Navy SEAL team entered the compound and shot Osama bin Laden dead, hitting him in the head and chest. Shortly after, President Obama declared justice had been done. Do you remember where you were when the Twin Towers fell? What did you think that day? Or if you weren't alive then, how do your parents or friends remember that terrifying event? Tell me in the comments below. Then if you like intense videos just like this one, just subscribe to American Eye if you haven't already to get more of this amazing content. Number 7. Eugene Palmer. Eugene Palmer allegedly killed his daughter-in-law on September 24, 2012. He supposedly shot her to death. This happened after Tammy Palmer, who was married to Eugene's son, decided to get a restraining order against her husband. They'd been having marital issues, and if a restraining order was involved, you can bet problems were likely violent. However, Eugene Palmer did not take kindly to his son getting a restraining order placed against him, and in a fit of rage, he decided it would be easier for everybody if he simply killed the woman responsible. Tammy Palmer walked her children to the bus stop to go to school in the morning, walked back to her house, and Eugene Palmer killed her with a shotgun blast. But he wasn't added to the FBI's most wanted list until 7 years later, and only because of recent leads that made the FBI believe they could find him. Unfortunately, Palmer is currently 82 years old and could very well be dead. Some believe that after he went on the run, he may have died while trying to hide out in the wilderness. This is mainly because his truck was initially found near the edge of his large property, which borders on Harriman State Park. The FBI believes that he likely fled into the wilderness, and considering he was a skilled outdoorsman who could hunt, fish, trap, and live off the land without being detected, it's likely he never left the woods after murdering his daughter-in-law. To this day, the FBI still has not found him. Number 6. Billie Austin Bryant. Billie Austin Bryant spent the least amount of time on the FBI's most wanted list out of anyone. He was on and off again in just 2 hours. First, Bryant was convicted of bank robbery in 1968 for participating in at least 6 robberies in Washington, D.C. While he was in jail working in the automobile shop, he managed to drive the car he was fixing through a chain-link gate and escape. It wasn't until 1969 that Billie resurfaced after robbing another bank. One of the tellers identified the robber as Bryant, and the FBI launched an investigation. They went to Bryant's wife's house to alert her that her fugitive husband could be in the area. Unfortunately for agents, it was Bryant who opened the door. He shot 2 agents at point-blank range and then escaped. The story of how he was recaptured is really astonishing. After killing the 2 FBI agents, Bryant fled to the first house he could successfully break into. He ran through the house, up into the attic, and was planning to hide out there for the foreseeable future. Unfortunately for him, the trap door to the attic jammed when he was closing it. Bryant ended up getting trapped inside the attic. The owner of the building then heard noises coming from upstairs. Considering the murder of the 2 FBI agents was all over the news, and adding that the incident had happened within the general vicinity of this guy's property, he was immediately suspicious. He picked up the phone, called the police, and within a short 2 hours, Bryant was back in FBI custody, and his name was removed from the most wanted list. Number 5. Thomas James Holden. Thomas James Holden was the very first man to get stuck on the FBI's most wanted list, but his career in being a criminal began much earlier in the 1920s when he robbed a mail train. Then in 1930, Holden escaped from the Leavenworth Penitentiary, only to be recaptured on a golf course. It's probably not the smartest thing to do as a wanted criminal, but he went golfing nonetheless and got caught. In 1949, Holden was out on parole when he became notorious. An argument broke out between Holden, his wife, and her 2 brothers, and he impulsively decided to shoot and kill all 3 of them. He was put on the FBI's most wanted list and then caught 13 months later while on the run and put back behind bars. Number 4. Leslie ISBEN-ROGGE. Leslie ISBEN-ROGGE robbed a bank in Florida back in 1984 and was arrested. At the time, he was suspected of robbing at least 25 additional banks. Leslie was convicted for the crime and sentenced to serve 25 years in jail. But after just 1 year of imprisonment, he managed to sneakily escape from a Utah penitentiary while waiting to be transferred to Iowa. What's even more incredible about this story is that after Leslie escaped, he apparently went on to rob a few more banks. It's probably the last thing you want to do while being a criminal on the run, but he did it anyway. Amazingly, Leslie evaded capture until 1996. This guy escaped from jail, robbed more banks, and managed to vanish for 10 years. It wasn't until his neighbor recognized him from his picture on the FBI website that he was captured. Leslie was forced to surrender in the country of Guatemala, where he'd been hiding out. He was returned to the United States, convicted of several different robberies, and then sentenced to serve 65 years in jail. Number 3. Ruth EISEMANN-SCHIER. Ruth EISEMANN-SCHIER was the first woman ever to be put on the FBI's most wanted list. To this date, there have only ever been 10 women placed on the list. She was added in 1968 after her and her boyfriend were charged with a savage kidnapping. They abducted a young woman and buried her in a box underground. The poor girl was only 20 years old when she was stolen. Ruth and her boyfriend demanded a ransom of $500,000. Amazingly, the ransom was paid and the kidnapped woman was dug up after spending 83 hours stuck in a box. That's enough to give anyone a nasty case of PTSD. Ruth went on the run, but she was eventually captured in Oklahoma on March 5, 1969, a year after her boyfriend was captured. Ruth had been disguised as a college student at the University of Oklahoma when she was discovered. Ruth pled guilty and was then sentenced to 7 years in prison, but only served 4. Number 2. James Earl Ray. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. His killer was none other than James Earl Ray, who fired his rifle from the bathroom window of a nearby home. James went on the run after the brutal murder, and thousands of FBI agents spent months trying to hunt the killer down. He was placed on the FBI's most wanted list, and an international manhunt ensued. This is the person who incited riots in over 100 cities for his murderous crime. According to ABC News, the riots following King's death resulted in over $27 million worth of damage, or about $193 million in today's money. The manhunt for James Earl Ray is still the largest criminal investigation that has ever happened in the United States. But James Earl Ray was a slippery person. He had had a long criminal career and had used at least 17 different aliases. He was not an easy man to catch. The FBI tracked Ray's movements with over 3,000 agents investigating the case. They had to track down and investigate thousands of different leads and anonymous tips. Keep in mind that this was before computers, and it was also a point in time when a person could run across the earth and be relatively unknown. The assassin fled Memphis to Detroit the next day and crossed into Canada the day after that. A month later, he was in London, England. He left England for Portugal and for whatever foolish reason ended up going back to London, where he was caught on June 8, 1968. It was over 2 months after he'd killed King, and he was finally captured at London's Heathrow Airport after he was ratted out by another customer who saw him handling 2 different Canadian passports. He'd been trying to go to Belgium when the officers detained him and later on realized who he was. Number 1. Victor Manuel Guerrena. Victor Manuel Guerrena has been on the run for over 35 years. He was a militant Puerto Rican nationalist and one of the alleged conspirators in the 1983 Wells Fargo robbery that happened at an armored car depot in West Hartford. He managed to get away with $7.1 million from the robbery, making it one of the largest in United States history. The heist went down on September 12, 1983, and to this day, Victor Manuel Guerrena is still at large. In fact, he's the last person involved with the robbery who hasn't been captured. One of his co-conspirators, Norberto Gonzalez Claudio, was captured in 2011 after being on the run for over 25 years. As for Victor's whereabouts, authorities believe he's hiding somewhere in Cuba. On the day of the robbery, Victor allegedly took 2 security guards hostage, handcuffed them, and injected them with a mysterious substance to subdue them. He then put $7 million in his trunk, drove off, and disappeared. The authorities believe that he made his way to Mexico, then boarded a plane and flew to Havana, where he's likely been living like a king since 1983. $7 million can certainly go a long way in any country in the world, and in Cuba, you could live comfortably forever. Victor has yet to be caught, and there's still a $1 million reward for any information that leads directly to his capture. Which of these villains was the most terrifying? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for stopping by. Be sure to subscribe for all the latest and greatest videos right here on American Eye.